Welcome to the Battle Buddy Podcast with Keith McKeever.
Welcome to the show, Moussa. Glad to have you here to talk about, kind of clarity of purpose and mindset and some things like that. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what your background story is in your military story.
Absolutely. Thank you, Keith. It's a privilege to be on your podcast, and connecting with another vet always means a lot to me, especially talking about this topic. My name is Moussa Mikhail. I'm a Las Vegas native. I'm a Navy submarine veteran. Prior to my military service, I was living in New Jersey. That's where I ended up going to high school, and realized I did not want to do what everyone else is doing. And my peer group was just going to college and then being in the mundane lifestyle. I wanted to be in the FBI, so I decided to join the military to give myself sort of an edge with a top secret clearance and education, military background. And I ended up going into the Navy, doing the one thing I didn't really want to do, which was being on a submarine. And I remember telling the recruiter that was the one thing I didn't want to do, and somehow I attracted that. And then at a certain point, I just surrendered to it. And I knew I was talking myself out of it because of fear. That's really what it was. I didn't want to be in a tube for months and months, isolated from sunlight and life. So I ended up doing my tour, 4 years on the USS Columbia, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which was very successful in the Navy's point of view, and 2 Western Pacific deployments. And during those deployments is where I really started to pay attention to the mindset of the individuals who were having success, the individuals who were having a terrible experience and suffering, including myself, and those who were just making the most of it. And I that's when I started really studying the mindset and using those deployments as an opportunity for growth. And then that led to a very bad experience with one of my sailors right before I got out the military, right before I separated, that really pushed me to want to do something to support vets and support people in general on their journeys towards self-improvement, which I guess we could talk about that story because it's a pretty deep story, but that's pretty much my background. Now that's led to me being in the entrepreneurial field, doing a podcast, which I'm very passionate about self-mastery and writing and speaking. So that's really the path that I'm taking into doing my part in supporting people on their journeys.
Yeah, I know we've talked previously, and that story of what happened is just one of those things that unfortunately more and more people tend to be finding themselves kind of in or around. I know we're not old, but I mean I can look back on my life and remember a point in time where acts of violence like that, active shooters and stuff like that, was just not that common. And between international terrorism things and domestic terrorism and just people just going postal, and there's a lot more of it these days. We see a lot more of it, and
Yeah.
I know that'd be a tough thing, and would probably shape anybody to kind of examine mentality a little bit closer and wonder what exactly happened. And if you want to talk about it, I won't stop you, because I have no problem going really deep on my show. Whatever you're comfortable sharing.
No, I absolutely love to share, just because the whole purpose I went on my journey of self-mastery to help people on their journeys is because of instances like that. Now, I agree with you, Keith. It is more common than I feel like it was, 10 years ago. And it's just like kind of a reoccurring thing where people are committing suicide or taking other people's lives. And then we look at the situation as, oh, they're crazy. People lost their mind. However, I don't believe people wake up one day just wanting to do stuff like that. It's definitely,
it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's just not like a flip of a switch, unless
Right.
It's a crime in the heat of passion, or whatever the criminal justice term is for it. But yeah, most of the time it's not.
Yeah, and I definitely noticed it. So the story behind it, if your guests are wondering what happened. So on the USS Columbia at the end of 2019, I think it was maybe in December or a month or so before Christmas, And that was about the same time I was heading out of the military. So I was separating to go on my venture to do serve in a different way. And one of the guys on that submarine that I served with on the Columbia, I noticed his mental health was not in great shape. I believe there was a lot of red flags throughout the process. His behavior, his personality, and then just inability to really catch on to the program, right? We on submarine, everyone has to be submarine qualified, usually within a year that they report to the submarine. And it was taking him a lot longer, and he was getting disciplinary issues and just a lot of behavioral things that should be addressed outside of the submarine area, right? With professionals, things like that. So eventually, one day it became a really bad disciplinary issue, and they did a review board, and then I don't know what the result was. I was not part of the review board, disciplinary review board for him. However, in that same day, he ended up going on an armed watch on a submarine. We're at shipyard at this point. Shipyard is when they take the submarine or any ship in the Navy out of the water and refurbish it and fix it up and all that stuff. So we're there. We still need 2 armed watches, armed men, protecting the submarine at all times. And he was one of them this day. He was armed with an M16 and a pistol. And then in the middle of the day, he shot 2 Hawaiian shipyard workers, and then he took his own life on watch with the Navy issued weapon. I was not present at that moment because I was doing my paperwork to separate. And then that's when I started getting calls of people who I knew who were working on the military base in Pearl Harbor, asking me like, what's going on? What's going on? They said active shooter on the USS Columbia. And I was just like, what? And I asked our corpsman, our doc, our medical guy, because I'm close friends with him, and I still am to this day. I texted him, I was like, what's going on? And then he said his name. And then that's it. That's when I understood. And that moment was just uncertain because I didn't know who was hurt. I didn't know the extent of what was going on. So it was just like knowing the guys that I just served with for years were in danger, potentially, really put me on this path of anxiety and not knowing what was happening. So I was very concerned. Then found out it was 2 Hawaiian shipyard workers and him taking his own life, and that just hurt to see. Right, these Hawaiians are very close. They're very family oriented. So to see that happen to the community in Pearl Harbor and to the community on the submarine, it was just a really dark times. And the problem the problem that I saw was the response to it. And I'm not going to bash the Navy. However, I really don't believe it was addressed properly, or the problems were addressed properly. And it was kind of looked at as like one of the isolated incidents. And like we said, those things don't just happen. He didn't wake up one day, it was like, okay, this is the day, right? There was a progression. And leadership, the entire community, the entire submarine, we all play a part in that. We all play a part in the culture. We all play a part. Any one person could have stepped in and said like, hey man, what's going on? And work what they could have to prevented that situation from happening. And that was what I saw lacked, was that nobody from my position to the top of the chain of command wanted to take any sort of ownership for what happened. They didn't want to take any ownership, which is what we need, right? We need the leadership to take ownership and make a stand for those type of issues. And that wasn't the first issue. There were several suicides in the submarine community alone that year, the same year. And I didn't even know who they were. Like, they didn't even give us the names of those people who committed suicide. And it was just like, they're really good at hiding these things. They really want to protect their image, because if people knew how many people committed suicide on a submarine, they would not want to do submarine duty. They're like, why are these people killing themselves on this duty? And that might be similar to other fields in the Navy or in the other branches. And it's just like they want to protect their image, and they don't really report on it.
Yeah, I think it's every career
Yeah.
field in every branch is probably that way. Like there's this image that you want to uphold, and from their perspective, they're trying to uphold an image, and then all of us individually as service members kind of put up this brick wall. Like, no, we're fine, we're good, even though the red flags could be there, and they can present themselves. It's in some ways it's like nobody's fault. In other ways, it's everybody's fault. Like somebody should have noticed it. Somebody should have said something. And I'm not going to try and say that they're equal, because what the guy did was terrible. But it's just like suicide. You know, my second deployment, I didn't know the guy, but I was working at the entry control point to Joint Base Balad, and we got relieved for the night. And I was a Humvee driver. We had a Humvee with a 50 cal on it, so it's just me and the driver out there. We got relieved for the night. Kind of the same guys that would relieve us, like, almost every night. And so, as changeovers go, it was like, yep, Humvee's there, the ammo's there, weapons there, it's all fueled up. You good? Yep, we're good. There's drinks in the cooler. High five, like there's nothing to do. As long as the vehicle runs, lights work, and weapons there, like that's all that really matters. So it was kind of a high five, and we're out of there. We got on the bus to leave to go back to the armory, go back home, shower, sleep, all that stuff. And the bus basically turned around and made it about, a quarter of a mile down the road before somebody's radio went off. We didn't even hear the gunshot, but I don't remember the guy. Nothing ever really stood out, but he was one of the guys that relieved me that night. And whatever was going on, somebody on his shift, heck, even me, maybe there's something that I missed. When the guy came out there, like, did I not take it? I should have taken more time to like look at him. Was there something wrong? Raise a flag somewhere and say, hey, I don't know if this guy should be out here. Whatever the case is, I don't know the guy's specifics, but I think there's a lot of instances like that where somebody should have seen something. Somebody probably did see something, but it was never said because of manning, because of image, who knows what. But we got to do a better job. Same thing, I think the same things happen in the veteran community now.
Yeah.
You said like what happened in the submarine field. I think last year in the Air Force Security Forces career field, and I didn't know any of them personally, but I knew people who served with pretty much every one of them or knew of each one of them. But it goes in Facebook circles. You see it when you're in those career field type groups. We lost like 12, 13, 14 members, something like that last year to suicide, active and veteran. And it's just like, no, that's just too damn much. Somebody should have known something. Somebody wasn't checking on their battle buddies, whatever. And so that's gotta change.
Yeah. And I definitely, I'm not trying to say that anyone on the submarine should have took guilt and been like, oh, this is my fault or anything. It's a bigger picture though. Like, why did one of our guys feel that was the only way, that was the only solution? And that kind of thought process just made me even look at it like, wow, like, what can I do now to help people, or to just ask the questions, or to ensure people can actually get help, or whatever I can do to say that it is okay to go see mental health. Why is there a stigma to help people process their own traumas and issues that they're dealing with? And that was the big issue. And it's not something that I make myself guilty for. I use it to drive me to help more people. Right. And that's sort of the core of my podcast, is if someone can hear a message that might help them in some way, I'm doing justice for them and just helping and being of service. And that's really what it is, man. And it's just hard to see. And you say 13, 14 people, and that's just a number for a lot of statistics. And you got to see how many people that affect, how many friends, how many family members, the communities, the Air Force, right? Because like 3 people died that day on that submarine. However, that affected an entire base and an entire island of people. because there was not one Hawaiian that was like okay with that, and no one was, right. No one wants this. Like no one was like, oh, someone like killed somebody on our base yesterday, and it's like it affected an entire amount of people, and it affected the entire Navy or the amount of people in the Navy that actually knew about it, because there's suicides that happen on the surface fleets that I never heard of. They don't report it to us. It doesn't come up in the news. And like the guy you talking about, that didn't show up in American news either. Like it's not talked about enough. And that's just I'm just trying to bring it to more awareness so people can actually see, like, what can I do? What's possible for me? Like if it took one conversation and that person changed their mind, or one resource, whether it's a suicide hotline, whether it's really seeing therapy, whether it's just people caring. Because a lot of times it only really takes one person to really care and really show that they care, to make someone realize that their life has way more value than whatever they're going through, and that it's temporary.
Yeah, I think shedding a lot of light on things is huge, and we all have to do it. And I think as veterans, like we should all learn more about this, and so we can spot the red flags and we can consciously know it's a red flag. Because there could be things that you could be seeing from your battle buddies or the people that are still serving. You can see from your teammates that are red flags, and you have no idea because you're not consciously looking for it. Like, well, that's just kind of the weird guy, or he's just kind of always like that. Well, was he always like that, or was he like that from day one when he got to your ship or to your unit? Because he was already pissed off in that or angry, whatever emotion, in that state when he got there. And you're just seeing what is normal and what is festered. You're not seeing what is really truly like their core being, their core personality, like who they really should be if they're getting help.
Absolutely.
And so if you can consciously recognize that stuff, then you can be like, okay, there's a problem here.
Yeah. And I'm reading an excellent book that I recommend. I haven't finished it yet. But it's with Oprah Winfrey and a neuroscientist, psychiatrist. I can't remember his name. However, it's called What Happened to You. And it's about changing the narrative from being what's wrong with that person or what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Because there's a deep root when someone shows up to a unit and they're already disgruntled, or if they have problems adapting, or if they have problems with their communication or their expression, which is really not that hard to notice. And then when I think back, I was like, this guy had so many red flags with emotional intelligence and his personality and the way he comprehended and just the behavior, that there should have been some deeper analysis. And then just asking that question, it's not coming from a place of judgment, but a place from understanding that if someone's acting in such a way, if someone is really disgruntled, if someone is really in depression or dealing with PTSD, what happened to you, right? And that's the conversation, trying to get to the solution by getting to the root, not just, oh, that person's crazy because he went to war, or that person was on the submarine, so he's just disgruntled like every other submariner, or whatever the case is. It's what happened that's deeper than that, right? Because there's always so much that builds up, man.
There's always a cause there somewhere. You just gotta kind of dig and pry and uncover it. And we do need to do a better job as a community of just asking the question and realize that it's not coming from a bad place. Like if I ask you, are you okay today? It's not coming from a bad place. Like it's coming from a good place. Like, hey, are you okay? Do you need anything? Yeah. Like, are you fine? Like, we should be a lot more open with each other.
Yeah.
And share information, share the stories so that you can figure out what's going on. And I think that there's some great places that is happening, like Clubhouse. I've been in a lot of chats on Clubhouse where somebody's struggling, and we just kind of gather around. People get pinged into the room, and we're just there and let the person talk, let them vent, and just kind of be there for them until they kind of calm down and get them the help they need. And I've seen that a lot.
Yeah, and promoting that,
awesome.
Promoting that kind of behavior and that kind of courage and vulnerability, right? Not putting some negative label on someone because they wanted to share something that they're going through. Or if they want to go mental health, there's some, they're just being a wuss or whatever, and a different version of that word. And, it's promoting that, like, wow, you opened up, like, that takes courage. That takes, you're trusting enough to say what you've been through or what you're going through. And that allows people to want to support, and that allows you to receive support. So that's a huge part of just getting clear, is trusting yourself and being open to receive support from people, which, it's just promoting that type of culture where if you say something that you're really feeling, you're really thinking about, that you don't get in trouble for it. You don't get bashed for it. You don't get bullied for it. You don't get hazed. You just have some people that understand, like, regardless of how bad it is. And that, I feel like that was the trend a lot. It was, people had a lot of these negative thoughts, and they're very in bad places, and they just felt like they couldn't tell anybody about it.
Well, it's hard to, when there's a stigma on different things. Like when I got back from my first deployment, I was flat out told by some people, like, if you go to mental health and you talk, they're going to take your weapon. And if you're a cop in the Air Force and they take your weapon, you're nothing. You've lost your career. It's embarrassing. It's degrading. To have all that power and authority by your position as a law enforcement officer, not carry a gun. Like there's like no other low. So it was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna go talk to anybody then. Just kind of ignore it and suck it up.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that happens on regular law enforcement. It's, oh, you went to see mental health, something's wrong with you. What's wrong with you? Rather than like, what happened? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. A lot of conversation this morning in Clubhouse, and I brought it up to somebody and put it in perspective like this. If you have a dental problem, you go to a dentist, right? If you have an eye problem, you go to your eye doctor, your eye specialist, whatever the problem is. You have a brain problem, you go to a neurologist, right? So like if you have PTSD or depression, anxiety, any of those kind of things, or you just have feelings that you need to get out, you should go to a mental health professional. It's no different.
Yeah.
they're
really
licensed, they're qualified. That's their area of specialty. You see specialists for other things, so you should go to a specialist for that. And then since we're on the topic of clarity, I mean, I had a lot of clarity last year when I realized that and I've been pro people getting mental health for a long time, but it's not that you're not crazy. What happened, the event, whatever happened to you, that was crazy. That was something weird. Because as I reflected on my own story, and as I had conversations, my wife has heard most of my stories, but as I was having conversations with my stepfather, who's a Vietnam veteran, and him and I were just having conversations, and he was actually kind of opening up a little bit more about some of his stuff. And my mother would kind of come in the room and listen, and she knows some of my stories, but she was kind of hearing it from a new perspective that was a little deeper, a little bit more raw. And I realized, I was like, wow, some of these stories, some of these things they're crazy if you're a civilian. But we lived through it. It was a real experience. The sights, the sounds, the smells, all those things. So that was the crazy part. What's happening in your brain is the reaction to it.
Right. And what's really crazy is, and it's kind of how the science behind PTSD is, when people go through serious trauma like that, it really starts affecting the way their brain really starts to work. Right. And there even in that book, they talk about it, and it's just like some things can trigger a PTSD reaction. And in your like conscious, your reasoning mind, you're just like, why did I react that way? Because like deeper than that, on the, like the subconscious level, the brain connects that type of experience to that reaction, which serves you in war or something that's traumatic. However, it doesn't serve you when you're at lunch in a coffee shop and you hear a motorcycle, bang or something. So it's, the brain really makes its own connections on a subconscious level. And that's something that people have to understand, because they might look at someone who has PTSD and like, oh, he's going crazy because he just freaked out over a firework, versus that's a real thing. And even though he's conscious of it, some part of it that's deeper needs to start being worked on and desensitized with a professional, which with psychologists and psychiatrists who understand how to start desensitizing those reactions. So it really does affect people on a physiological level as well.
Yeah, and it's weird how different things can, manifest, because, I kind of lived in denial that I had any PTSD type issues, because, unfortunately TV and movies just kind of portray it as, violence against your spouse, I mean, I hate to be kind of graphic with it, but, pushing down the stairs, smacking them, pushing them around, like that's kind of how they portray it. But, there's other things like, extreme isolation, depression, just avoiding people, avoiding crowds. Like there's all kinds of different ways, right? I'm not a professional in that arena, but like there's all kinds of different ways as you start reading. If you read on some of the symptoms, and it's like, wow, okay, there's a lot more to it than angry outbursts.
Mm-hmm.
It can manifest in so many different ways. So, that's where it gets hard to get clarity, and but not everybody, has PTSD and needs clarity. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't, but just find themselves kind of in a funk, for lack of a better term, of like, hey, I'm kind of stuck in my ways. I'm stuck in my mindset. And I just need to tear down that wall and like change it. So,
right. Yeah. And that's something that definitely showed up for people during this pandemic, was when they were left to, if unfortunately people lost their jobs, that's not easy. However, it shows up how many people were unhappy, discontent, or just not in a place where they can actually enjoy life despite what was happening around them, right? Because unfortunately the pandemic was happening, and that's a real thing. People got sick and died. However, it's still something that's for a large scale out of our control, right? So I feel like it was a good time for people to reflect on what do they want, because let's say if you're in a field that maybe you lost your job, that insecurity of not making an income definitely affected you, or may affected someone So it's really thinking about getting clear on, is this what I really want to do, or is this the type of life I want, and getting clear on what really drives somebody. And that's something that I was struggling through the pandemic as well, because I was doing real estate, and I was realizing I was not being fulfilled, and I started getting the same feelings I was getting when I was in the Navy, of just unfulfillment. There's a lot of potential for success in a lot of fields. There's a lot of ways to make money. However, am I being fulfilled? Like, what is my heart calling me to do? Like, how can I show up the better version of myself to help more people? And where am I limiting myself? That's the questions I was asking. Like, where am I holding back on who I really am? And that started coming up for me, and I always wanted to have a podcast, and I was talking myself out of it for a long time. And it was just like it was still deep down. And it's I feel like until you get in alignment with what you really want on a subconscious level, what would really bring you happiness, there's always going to be a lot of friction there. And that friction is really palpable.
Man, it's hard for me to even have a response to that, because we're so similar in a lot of ways, both in real estate, both podcasts kind of talking about, to the military and veteran audience, but, I know yours expands to non-military and veteran as well. But that's a lot of the reason I started this podcast. I do a lot of volunteering with the Honor Flight program. Absolutely love it. They're like another family to me. And then when COVID hit, and all of a sudden we weren't making flights happen, we weren't even getting together and doing really much of anything, struggling to find ways to get together, it like pulled a rug out from underneath me. Like that was so healing to me for years, to give back, to be around fellow vets and, do different things. And so I was kind of the same way. Like I was like, oh, well, I can do the podcast thing. I love listening to podcasts. And here we are, this is your guest number 16 on the show. And, the journey has been amazing. I absolutely freaking love it. Every conversation is unique and special and awesome. It broadens my horizon, gives me a little bit more clarity that, like, my purpose, like, I love real estate. It's something I'm passionate about. I always tell people I'm passionate about two things: real estate and veterans issues. You know, you get me talking about either one of those, I'm gonna keep talking forever. Those are
And
things
that's
I'm
good.
passionate about.
Yeah.
And so, like, it really kind of showed me, like, okay, I have to do something in both arenas because I have that deep of a passion. I have a connection to it. And so that
And
kind of showed me a lot of clarity
yeah.
personally.
That's really what I believe it starts coming from, is the awareness of the passion that you have when you're doing something. And you know, if someone doesn't have passion for something, it's noticeable, and you might not even notice how much you don't like it, and you probably do, because there's a lot of people who I saw in the military who just clock in, clock out, and they're just doing it for the paycheck. Even in the civilian sector that was helping the military, they just do it for the paycheck because they know they get decent money, and they live in this mundane stage where they don't feel like they're fulfilling their purpose, where they don't feel like they're really making a difference, or they don't feel significant in whatever way. And that takes a toll, and you start noticing it because your energy is low. That's the first thing that you notice. If you're not doing something that brings you passion, your energy is going to just be low all the time. And then that just brings me back to a question that came from a Stoic philosopher that I never forgot. And it was a simple question. It was like, how much longer are you willing to wait to demand the very best of your life? And that was just like, what is the best? What's possible for me to create? What's possible? And that's really where things start to shift. When you start moving from, oh, I can't do that. I can't make a podcast. I can't write a book. I can't start real estate business. And start thinking, what's possible? Like, what can I create? Right? Because now, look, even you, Keith, like, you're making a podcast and you're supporting veterans all across the country, the world, with whatever issues they have, and at your scale, and that'll grow and grow and grow. However, you're doing the most you can, right? And then more opportunities, more possibilities will start opening up, right? More connections. This person knows somebody who can help you reach more veterans. This person knows somebody that can help you get more real estate deals, and start opening up more possibilities. However, that wouldn't be possible if you were stuck and you didn't even start the podcast, if you didn't go for what you were passionate for. And that translates to almost every area of your life. When you live centered on your passion, and you're in that realm of what's possible for me to create, what's possible. And that shifts the dialogue in your brain.
Yeah, it's something weird happens when you shift from this, like, going through the motions to looking for the opportunities, taking those purposeful steps. And I did a pre-show interview for my podcast yesterday with an awesome military spouse, and her and I immediately knew, I was like, okay, I got to have her on my show. Try not to tip the hat as what we're going to talk about. But there were some other things that were, in motion and we're talking. We're like, okay, all right, we got to collaborate on A, B, and C here. Like, there's no doubt about it. We're going to put our heads together and we're going to figure something out and try and bring some extra resources and information to the military spouse community. I'll leave it at that. But keeping your mind open and looking for that opportunity. Her and I were both in that space where we're like, hey, let's do this. Like, the podcast episode is one thing, but we can take this a step further. We can collaborate and we can do something that really impacts some other people beyond just an hour-long episode.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can shift your mindset to that, that's huge.
Right.
So,
And that is just a possibility of you just stepping into your greatness, right? Because if you talk yourself out of it, like, oh, I'm not good enough to make a podcast, you might not have met her or whatever. Oh, and then that opportunity to help more people wouldn't have been available to you. So it's really becoming clear on your capability as a man or woman to affect other people. And that really starts from the belief in yourself, your self-worthiness, right? Because once you believe you're worthy to create great things and have greatness and have great relationships, you start to see those opportunities very clearly. If you don't believe that you're capable or worthy of having a great business, a great relationship, whatever it is, your mind's not going to see that. It's going to block those opportunities out, and you're going to be stuck on what you're focused on right now.
Yeah. I think if you study successful people, and I'll just throw some random names out there, but the Gary Vaynerchuk, Tony Robbins, Bill Gates, right? Like they all have that mentality of what's possible, and they match it with action. That's to me like the two biggest indicators. You look at anybody successful, they did something, and they had the right mentality that was pointing them in the right direction. May not have been perfect, it probably adapted over time, but like that was a huge factor in their success. I fundamentally think that's a factor in everybody's success. You're not going to be successful if you don't have the right mentality.
Yeah.
I think you kind of defined it really good. I was going to ask you to kind of define clarity, but I think that was a really, really kind of awesome way to kind of define it.
Yeah, and you mentioned something great, because like I'm a huge Tony Robbins fan, and I know he talks about having absolute certainty and clarity in what you want, like the outcome. To know your outcome is what he would say, and that's absolutely true. You want to know your outcome, and that just the intention you have. If that's set, like absolutely, I'm going to do this, then the how, the mechanism to take you there, you figure out on the way. And sometimes you might try something won't work, and you understand that, and then you try something else, and you continue to shift and move and shift and move. And a part of that is becoming okay with failure, and that failing is just the event, and it's an opportunity to learn, right? And
opportunity.
And that's really what it is, because anything great, think of anything great that's ever been invented, any great organization, it didn't just like happen without any failure in the making. And it was just a lot of shifting and moving. This didn't work. Who can help me here? Who do I need to talk to? And you start getting this relationship with failure and this relationship with fear, that it's going to be present, and it's a possibility. However, it doesn't need to stop me from talking to this person. It doesn't need to stop me from asking for what I want. And that's really what starts making those slow progressions, is that relationship. And that's huge, man. Relationship with fear was big for me. And it was because a lot of times people say fear stopped me from, my fear of rejection stopped me from asking this girl out, whatever. And it's not fear of rejection that stopped you. It was your relationship to fear. The fact that fear controlled you. You didn't have fear. Fear had you in that moment. And that's something that I am still practicing, to not let fear have me, but to have fear and still choose what action is going to serve me moving forward.
Yeah. Pushing through that fear like makes it stronger. I'm going to assume, because we're both podcasters, you probably had a little bit of fear before doing your very first episode. I know I did. Like I was nervous, like, okay, what could go wrong? What is this going to look like? What does episode 1 look like? What does episode 15 look like? What is 20 going to look like? 25, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a little bit of fear, but here we are, handful of episodes in, and I've gone from that fearful place of what does this look like to I know it's going to be awesome, because I've already interviewed most of my guests, if not all of them, beforehand. I know what we're going to talk about. It's just going to be awesome. Like it's going to exceed my expectations, because you just put it out there. And so, you shift from that fear of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen, to like, nope, I know it's going to be awesome. It's going to be amazing. Content's going to be out there. Absolutely,
man. I absolutely agree. And it was that same thing. It was like my episode 1 is where I'm at right now. And then when I look back at it, I'll see the growth, and it's just about just starting. And it's something interesting that some people usually don't know, that what kind of blew my mind, is like some A-list celebrity actors, for example, still get fearful and nervous when they play a part in a movie. And it's like, really, like they still have those emotions. However, like you would never know that, because they're excellence in what they do. However, it's that just shows that fear doesn't just go away. No one's fearless. It's just, oh, there's fear here. I acknowledge it. I understand it. I'm not going to let it stop me because my service is more important than me talking to myself saying I'm stupid or I'm not smart enough or I'm not good enough or people are not going to like me or people are not going to listen or whatever the case was. And that you had that conversation. I feel like everyone does when they're starting something new that's a risk for them. Anytime someone starts a business, they're going to have some of that fear show up. And the ones that create great businesses and have success, they didn't just not have fear. They had fear also. They just chose to move past that and act in spite of it.
Yeah, just know that it's going to kind of naturally just be there. To some degree, to some varying level, it's going to be there, and you just got to kind of push back through it. So, but I did want to circle back to your time in the Navy, because we've talked about clarity, but let's kind of bring it back to like fighting the mental struggles and finding that clarity. So, what kind of tools did you guys use when you're on the submarine? You're under the water. There's nobody around. There's just however many of y'all guys down there in a floating tin can. What did you guys develop to deal with things?
Yeah, a lot of it. Well, I'll say for me, I had this mindset of anytime I'm underwater, I'm going to make it as productive as possible, whether it's me and furthering my Navy career and certain qualifications or me reading books, listening to podcasts and just learning and getting other perspectives that I would have never had or never allowed myself to sit down and listen to or whatnot when I'm too busy or say I'm too busy when I'm in port or whatever. And a lot of it was just that's when I really started to take this growth mindset where I'm going to learn as much as I can to deal with these emotions, to deal with this type of environment. A lot of it that I know most submariners, I'll say on their behalf, for the most part, you have to surrender. That shows up in life in so many different ways. When you're underwater, you have to surrender to the fact that the crew that's on watch right now is taking care of us, right? Because you're underwater. Like that's a threat of itself, right?
Absolutely.
We want to make sure we can come back up. And if we fill up with too much water, so it's I learned that, and I didn't really register it in the beginning. However, I knew that was the only way I'll have peace when I go to sleep at night. Is just surrendering that it's all going to be okay. That these guys are trained. On my submarine, there was about 140 to 150 men, and our sole purpose is to achieve the mission and get home. And that was a big part of my job was navigation, right? My job was to make sure we didn't mud dart anywhere and that we execute our plans safely. So
I'm getting a visual in my head of mud dart. I've never heard that term before, but I'm getting a visual.
Yeah, we use it as something that was like the worst thing we could ever do. So gladly it doesn't happen. However, it's always a threat, right? Because you don't have these like windshield underwater, right? It's we use sound to navigate. So
it's got to be the weirdest feeling in the world.
No windows, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's like driving blind, I guess. I mean, it's just that would just be weird.
It is very interesting.
I can imagine the mental struggles of getting over just that struggle of I can't see where I'm going, and so now I'm going to rely on a different sense to make sure that we get where we go.
Yeah, and it's a lot of things, a lot of screens and gauges, and a lot of things that people work together. But we all work together to make sure that happens. And I started realizing there was so many mechanisms involved that help us do our job safely that I just had to trust that and move forward. And then with that, a lot of people who it is difficult, right? You can't just pick up a phone and call your best friend or your girlfriend, or your wife or whatever. And you can't just go out to the store. You can't go out to eat. You can't go out for drinks because you're in the tube. So what can I do now? And it's simple. Someone said it right before I ever went on a submarine, because I was just like, they were in for like 20 years. They've been on like 10 deployments. And I was just like, how did you like do all that? And he told me it was just making everything fun. And that's not just on a submarine. That's like, how do I make the most of where I'm at right now? Because I can choose to find something to complain about, or I can choose to find something that helps me, makes it more entertaining, makes it more fun, makes it better. And that's where a lot of camaraderie comes from in a submarine. And that really,
and childish shenanigans.
yeah, childhood shenanigans, a lot of shit talking, and a lot of things. And it's less bad as like the old submarine stories I used to hear. A lot of that stuff just not okay in the modern days. However, it builds.
Surprise me.
Yeah, it's really, and you realize how important that is too. And then I translate that to my life, man, because it's the support of your friends and your relationships, your support system that help you get through whatever. And that's in and out of the military, civilian or not. Like, if you're going through something and you have people who actually there to support you, you get through it. And that's something that I work on still to this day, is creating a support system, making connections, making the relationships and friendships happen, and look at how can I develop a support system that we can support each other through difficult things. And that really helped me moving out of the military.
I think you kind of answered my next question, but we'll see if you have anything else to add to it. I was going to ask you, how can somebody shift their mindset if they're reflective enough to know that like they're not in the right place, their mind's not focused on what it needs to be focused on, they need that clarity. How can they shift themselves to get to that point? I know that's probably first step one, being able to reflect and know where you're at, but
yeah. So what comes to mind is something I read by Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, and in Auschwitz he found a way to be peaceful and happy. So anything is possible. Okay, if Viktor Frankl could do it in Auschwitz, I could do it on a submarine.
Yeah, if
right?
he says so, man, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, so
I mean that's not a place you would expect a happy emotion at all.
Right, especially Viktor Frankl talks about in his book The Man's Search for Meaning, and he watched his whole family die, and like thousands and thousands and thousands of people, right? Because it's the Holocaust. And he still said that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our ability to choose. And in those choices lie our growth and our happiness. So that really shifted the way I look at everything, because every stimulus causes a response. However, you have a little space where you can, if you're aware and you're not just emotionally hijacked, you can choose what you're going to do. Like at this point, if someone really, really makes me angry, I don't just like flip out. I actually think about what is the best choice here? What is going to serve me? Then that's the next choice, the next action. So it's really recognizing those emotions. Once you recognize that anxiety, for example, what does that mean? It's really questions, man. Keith, questions are the thing that will always help. So if you want to shift your mindset, ask yourself specific questions. Whenever you ask yourself a question, your brain will find an answer. It will search. Like it's going to happen. So is this going to serve me? Yes or no? No. Like, this is not going to serve me if I punch this guy in the face, because that doesn't really help me. Unless I'm like defending myself for whatever reason.
Yeah, unless you're your last choice.
Yeah, if it's like really self-defense, you might have to. However, if it's just like, oh, this guy disagreed with me, what's going to serve me? If I'm going to request someone on an interview for my podcast, and the fear that comes up, I notice that fear, I notice that nervousness, what's going to serve me? Saying, no, I'm just not going to ask. Or just, I'm just going to ask anyway, and whatever happens, happens. And if he says no, I ask later, right? It's having that awareness of how you're feeling, because all emotions, they usually have some type of physiological response in our bodies, and then asking the question, what is the best move here? What can I do here? How is this serving me? Is this even serving me anymore? Is this reaction helping me get to where I want to go? right? And then if you can stop just for a split second in that space and ask yourself a question that prompts a response, a good quality question, like, what is the option here that's going to help me move forward and not just get me stuck in this cycle of emotions? What's going to get me past it? What's going to help me overcome? What's going to help me conquer this? That's when your mind looks for different solutions. Like, hey, maybe you should just like walk away instead of like keep fueling this argument. Or maybe you should, have a conversation with your spouse about why this upset you, instead of thinking that person's psychic and just going to understand what you're thinking, because no one does. Right. So it's what serves me right now.
Yeah. Avoid going to that Karen moment. Right. Don't be that guy. Don't be a Karen, whatever, whatever the case may be. That's really good. I like that. Kind of stop and ask yourself a question, because that's actually what my counselor kind of told me, even like to react to things, like just pause before you respond at all. Just count to 5, and then your response will be better. But I never really thought about, kind of consciously asking yourself a question, right? Your brain's going to process certain things, and you're going to go through that kind of question process anyway. But if you kind of consciously ask yourself that question, okay, all right, Moussa really pissed me off a second ago, right? I can be the nice guy, or I can punch him in his face.
Right.
What do I want to do? Right. Maybe that's the question. Do I want to punch him in his face or not? Like,
and as crazy and how often people hear it, the best thing to get you to kind of get focused on that space where you can actually choose what you want to react with is breathing. Because if you start just like noticing how you're breathing, that gives you that mental space, that head space where you can, choose. So it's like when people say take a breather, like take a pause, like take a breath, like that has real scientific evidence that if you stop, take a breath, like your brain can process something. And usually if you're in an anxious state, or you're stressed out, or you're angry, you're not breathing fully. You're very, very shallow in the way you're breathing. So it's like, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what is this serving me or not? And I used to do it even with productivity, because I would catch myself a lot of times on a submarine just like wasting time. And I was like, is this the best use of my time? No. Okay, let me go do what's the best use of my time. And I'm still practicing that now, because like sometimes I just like lay there and just don't want to do anything. However, I think like, what is this the best use of my time? No, I can be reading, or I can be reaching out to someone, or whatever it is. Like, questions are the key to everything.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Like I said, I think that just that momentary pause of at least 5 seconds, and just at least 5 seconds normal breathing at a minimum, will change your response. And and then maybe give you that clarity to hopefully make the right decision and not punch somebody in their face or whatever,
Another great question for self-awareness and realizing things is why. Simple. Why am I feeling this way? Like, why am I reacting this way? Why do I feel this is what I need to do to make a point? Why will reveal a lot of stuff. And if you keep asking why to yourself, you'll get to the real reason, the real why, and not just a bunch of stories we use to justify our behavior. Like, why do I not want to ask this person for a real estate deal? Or why do I not want to do this? Because I don't think I'll get it. I don't think I'll get it. Well, why do I think I'll get it? Because, they're busy. Well, why do I think they're busy? And then why? You realize it's something that you can control, which is just your belief or limiting belief that's stopping you from taking any action anywhere. Like, I'm afraid of rejection. I don't believe I'm good enough. So that makes me feel like, oh, this person's too busy or whatever, and that one belief, once you start like, oh, that's what's stopping me from wanting to do this, wanting to lose weight, wanting to enhance a relationship or start a business, you start realizing like that same belief is stopping everything that you want from happening.
Why? That is a good one. And I'm going to take this from a different perspective and not kind of like a personal reaction clarity, but but it kind of made me think back to when I was in. I think this is something every veteran is gonna kind of understand. When leadership comes down with something stupid, right? It makes no sense. It's stupid. You hate it. Everybody's sitting around the smoke pit complaining about it. I noticed real quick when I was in that happened a lot, right? I think we can all agree that happens all the time. And then I was like, why? Why this decision? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Right? I know there's been some backlash lately about, I think it was just the Army, Air Force might have done it too, but grooming standards for women, allowing them to wear ponytails, right? And a lot of backlash. Who cares? Honestly, like for starters, who cares? But why? Why did they change it? Well, I don't really know. I wasn't sitting in the room when they made that decision. But you have to trust that the people that are ahead of you, rank-wise, position-wise, authority-wise, whatever, are armed with more information, and you have to believe that they're making the best decision they can for the group as a whole. You may not agree with it. It may suck and make your job harder, but that's one thing that I learned real quick, and it kept me from sitting there dwelling on that crap. Like other people sitting around the smoke pit, 6 months later, pardon my language, but bitching and complaining about it. It's like, okay, it's out of my control. I don't care.
Right.
If I was in right now, I'd feel the same thing about women in hair. Like, okay, it's going to be weird seeing women walk around in uniform with their hair in a ponytail. Okay. It's going to be weird. But what effect does it have on my life? None. So if I pay no attention to it and just accept it, and kind of think about, why, well, somebody armed with more information made a decision that they felt was best for the force. I don't have to sweat it anymore. Right. And that gives me more clarity to focus on the things that really do matter that I have control over.
Right. And you did it too. You at some point you asked yourself, is this worth my energy and contemplation? Is this serving me? Yeah, no, it's not. Like, why am I going to keep talking about something that out of my control? Someone made a decision already. And I asked that question like every day when I heard any guidance come out. I'm just like, why? And it's something that any leader, Jocko Willink talks about it in his books. If you're a leader in any team or even just in your family, it will definitely serve you to make sure your people know why any decisions ever made. Because that was one thing that bothered me so much, is like I never knew why. There was some missions I was on, I'm just like, why are we doing this? And it's just
it makes no logical sense.
Yeah, nothing makes sense.
To somebody.
Somebody thought it made sense, and that's what needs to be communicated. If in any relationship, if your kid, if you're explaining something to them and they're just like puzzled or they get mad or frustrated, they don't understand the why behind it. And if they really understand the why, then they'll be like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. I'll do it. Right. And then you get a lot less friction between subordinates and leadership. So
I just did that the other day with my kid. I'm not going to go into what exactly he did, but he was messing around with something in my garage. And, finally found out it was him, which I knew was him. It's the parent instinct we have, right? I was like, dude, I know it's you. I know your brother has more sense than that. But, he was doing something, and then, so I caught him, and he finally admitted to it. And then I had that conversation with him. I'm like, okay, here's why you can't play with that in the garage. Here's the list of the things that could happen. And, and here's why you can't do it. Actually, it wasn't that bad. Okay. Got a gas can out there sitting next to my snow, and he decided to kind of pour just a little bit on the ground. I'm talking like just a drop, right? Because he was kind of curious what the color of gasoline was. And it was like, dude, you think at his age, man, he'd be smart enough not to do that. So I had this conversation with him, like, dude, it's dangerous. It's flammable. You could, I said, if you were to start a fire and I was down in the basement, I would not be here right now. I'd be dead. I've only got one way out of my basement. And and then it hit him at 8 years old. He's like, oh, I got you, Dad. I understand. Yeah. Now that you explained why I can't play with that. Exactly. And I'm always very upfront with my kids. I'm like, if you don't understand something, you want to understand how something works, then ask. Like, you want to understand how a screwdriver works? Fine. I'll get a piece of wood. I got tons of screws around here. You can drive all the screws you want into that piece of wood. If you want to learn how to use a saw, then I'll teach you how to use it safely. Right. but you need to understand what the dangers are and how and
Mhm.
why and all that stuff. But it was one of those things. It was just like, dude, why?
Right. Yeah, and that's
To get
helpful, right?
why.
Because like some people might see that and just react and yell at their kid and like go away, like go in your room, like don't mess with that. And then the kid's just like, oh, like feeling all these emotions, like, oh, I'm ashamed, I'm scared, I'm fearful, or whatever, and they
And
don't
curiosity
understand.
proves up
Yeah,
again too.
curiosity was like, I just
Like,
wanted to
oh,
see
okay.
what the heck it was.
Now I'm
It's
gonna
like,
play that
oh,
again.
why? Oh, this thing's toxic. It could burn down the house. Like, that makes sense. I won't do that, right? And then it leaves the situation better. So kids are amazing practice for
Yeah,
leadership.
it's it was definitely one of those things. I'm like, dude, it was kind of tucked in the corner next to the snowblower. I don't know how you were even over in that corner and saw the tank, approved canister and all that stuff. And I'm just like, you never know what you got to put up for your kids. I thought we were
Right.
past all the safety device stage, but they do some weird things. A couple weeks ago, they took a hammer and a screwdriver and drove it into a log for the burn pit, like for no reason. I'm like, why'd you do that? Like, I don't know, because we wanted to see what happened. Just like, I could have told you what happened if you just asked. It's like you didn't need to ruin my screwdriver because I had to bend it to get the thing out. But kids. So I was gonna ask you one more question about the submarine thing, and this is just kind of a curiosity thing because I know when you guys are at sea, sometimes you're probably out there for months or at least weeks. You could be underwater or with minimal communication. So, just out of a curiosity question, what's like the weirdest piece of news that you guys kind of heard when you kind of got back to a station or you kind of came up where you could get a signal? Like, what's the one thing that like went throughout the whole ship? Like everybody is like, oh my gosh, did you hear about this?
Yeah, there's a few, man. I remember Prince died once. Well, not once. He died when I was on a submarine underway. And then I remember coming back from a deployment and there was a whole Harambe issue, the gorilla. And I was just like, what the hell is Harambe?
Oh, that would have been
And
really
it was like
confusing.
my friends were catching me up and I'm just like, wow. Like I felt like every time I came back from a deployment, I felt lost in the sauce, man. 6 months just like off the grid. I did not know what the hell was happening in the world. So Harambe was one of the ones that were just like, wow, that was kind of funny and crazy.
That was
It's like
a weird time.
whole revolution going on when that Harambe incident happened. And I'm just like, wow, that's crazy. So that was a running joke for a little bit.
Oh, I bet. And I got to kind of thinking about that. I just came up with that question because I was just like, man, that's gotta be really weird. From my perspective, being Air Force, and both times I was deployed. I mean, I was obviously on the ground, right? We had phone calls, we had connections to the outside, so you did hear some, most news. It might be a little delayed, but not 6 months delayed. But I figured that there had to be a good story there about kind of catching up with the world and some WTF moment of like, what?
Yeah, there was a few, yeah.
Except for you.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch of things that happen in those couple of years that are just like at a certain point I was just like, I don't even care what's going on. And that was just like me just getting by. And I missed so many sports and events and just things. It was just kind of like almost depressing in a way. That's just like, man, I'm missing on life. However, it was the best thing because it taught me to cherish the time. And now I have a great gratitude for time. I feel like more than a lot of people I know, and I appreciate time and I appreciate the little things a lot more because of that time I spent in a tube.
So, did you ever catch up like on the Super Bowl and find out that Tom Brady didn't win one? Is that ever like a shock too, or some of the sports world news like that would just be the craziest thing?
Yeah,
man, he didn't win one.
I was out of the loop with sports for so long, and I did miss one of the Super Bowls because I deployed right before Christmas, and missed the whole holiday season, Super Bowls and everything, and it was just like, wow, like I just want to watch the Super Bowl again. You miss out, and it's just like, yeah, man, Tom Brady's still whooping ass.
Yeah.
Like it does the news, like, Patriots are in the Super Bowl again. All right, cool, whatever.
That's weird. Yeah.
What a surprise.
I'm sure that's kind of a common thing, though. I don't know how much communication there is, with some ships to the outside world, but sure it's difficult sometimes to get messages, in and out and hear all the details of what's going on in the world. That's got to be weird.
Mm-hmm.
There's even a TV show about it, The Last Ship. I don't know if you've seen it. My kids love watching that one. A Navy destroyer on some mission. They come back and the whole world's infected by some virus. Weird.
It's crazy. A lot of the surface ships now have Wi-Fi. So it's like, wow, we're on a submarine. We can't talk to anybody. And you guys got Wi-Fi freaking on Facebook and shit while we're out here like reading a book. That's all we got to do.
Stuff on TikTok. Gotcha. Now it makes sense.
Yeah.
No, it's weird how, times go. Like I've heard of people, on deployments over the last like 10 years, and they're doing FaceTime or they're doing video chats with their family back home. They're like, man, I had to get some card that had 50 digits on that thing. Okay. I had to wait in line 3 hours to sit in a hot trailer with no air conditioning just to punch these 50 digits in and pay an exorbitant amount just to talk to my mother or my stepfather, my sister, whatever, for 10 minutes. God forbid the card runs out and somebody's got to send you one. Or, it's like, and they're FaceTiming now.
It's getting better. I heard they got like Starbucks on some aircraft carriers and like you can order Amazon and they'll like fly it in.
That sounds incredibly dangerous. Just the sheer volume of stuff that could be on the ship. I don't
know if it's true. Don't quote me on that. It was just like, true. I've never been on an aircraft carrier to find out.
No, that seems like a crazy situation, being in the middle of the sea on a giant ship with loud planes. I tell you what, being Air Force, I hated fighter jets. It was like, man, they're the coolest things in the world, but man, those things are damn freaking loud, man.
They're loud, man. And actually, I'm here next to Nellis Air Force Base, and a fighter jet just crashed into a neighborhood.
I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
That's
imagine me and you doing this podcast, and a freaking jet comes and hits me. Like, how unfortunate.
Well, I think I would quit podcasting at that point.
That's PTSD right there.
I'd be like, okay.
No, it's crazy to think, like crashing into houses, like that's crazy.
Yeah, it's part of the risk though. Aircraft and things can go wrong. And when I was down in Ecuador for 6 months, and one of the first things they told us, because we were on Ecuadorian Air Force Base, was, you got to prepare for a crash down here because the Ecuadorian Air Force Base, now their planes were like from the 60s, right? But they're like they average 3 crashes a year, and we're like, we're down here for 6 months, so we might see 1 or 2.
Yeah, man.
And so we did a lot of exercises for. We got lucky when we were down there, but it was like, this is great because that's gonna be a mess to deal with.
It is.
From multiple perspectives. We won't go there, but we will wrap it up. I got 3 final questions for you that I ask every veteran that comes on my show. So the first one is, what advice would you have for somebody who's looking to transition out of the military, today, sometime soon, etc.?
Best advice I can give is just getting a support system around you, because I thought I had everything planned out and I had a good plan getting out, and it was still extremely hard on me. So getting support systems and maintaining those connections, those relationships with people, and even if people who are getting out, like, check up on them, right? Because those support systems make a huge difference.
That's a good one. Yeah, I think that's a huge key to success, whatever that looks like for veterans. So what about somebody who's looking to join the military today? What kind of advice would you have for them besides don't get yourself on a submarine?
It's just make sure you know your why. Why do you want to be in the military? Because I see a lot of people, they join the military for their reasons, and then somewhere along the way they forget why they joined. And that's where things start going south, and their behavior, their experience starts becoming a negative experience. Be very clear on why, and just keep that in the forefront always. Why did you even join in the first place? Because that'll get you through all the challenges in the Navy or any branch.
Imagine that. There's a why question again.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's a good one.
Why am I doing this?
Yeah, why?
Very clear on that.
Quite often. So the final question here, give you an opportunity to kind of, not necessarily question, but an opportunity to give a shout out to any veteran organizations or nonprofits or anybody you think is doing some good things out there. Who would you like to give a shout out to?
I'd love to get a shout out to 22 Warriors. They're a foundation that's based out of Las Vegas. However, they help veterans all over. really fighting veteran suicide and providing amazing resources for veterans for free. So awesome organization, 22warriors.org.
22warriors.org. All right. I'll have to remember that one. Add that to my website. I don't know if you've been on my website or not, but constantly trying to put some resources myself on there. So that kind of, it's always an interesting question to kind of ask and see what else, other people have seen, because I may not have. And trying to add the resources out there. The more places that eyeballs can see things.
No, awesome. Definitely a lot of opportunities to help people out there. You just got to be open to it.
Absolutely. So that's all I've got. Got your website scrolling at the bottom, moussamikhail.com. You can check them out at the Conqueror Approach podcast. I know it's on Spotify because that's where I listen. What other platforms? I'm assuming, Apple, Google, and all those things.
Yeah, it's on all platforms, all major platforms. YouTube, I post the videos. So anywhere podcasts are listened, you can catch the Conqueror Approach.
And YouTube, same thing I do. I get it out there everywhere. So I appreciate you once again, Moussa, taking the time. Despite some technical issues we had earlier today, we got it done. So I really appreciate you bringing it, some information on mindset and clarity, because like I said earlier, it's like a perfect time for it, because we're in that shifting point as the CDC kind of comes out with some new guidance and masks, and what's the new normal of the world look like. And I think a lot of people could really use a lot of clarity, going forward, and figure out, how to navigate what's in front of us, whatever that looks like. So,
and I want to thank you. You're doing amazing work. Keep it up, as your message makes a difference. And it was an honor to be on your show and be connected with you.
Absolutely. I'm gonna go ahead and play the little outro right here. And once again, thanks a lot.
Thank you, man. Take it easy.